Well, I never thought we'd be covering mobile games on the channel, but here we are. Leading up to the release of Metal Gear Solid 4, Konami was really milking the Metal Gear brand, with them pumping out 3 PSP titles between the releases of MGS 3 and 4 alone. And just to make sure that they squeezed every last bit of juice out of that sweet handheld gaming fruit, Konami also licensed the franchise out to London-based developers IdeaWorks Game Studio, allowing them to make a Metal Gear title for mobile phones, with Metal Gear Solid Mobile releasing just 3 months before Metal Gear Solid 4. So, would Metal Gear's first foray into the mobile gaming market be any good, or was it simply a quick cash grab to capitalize on the hype? Well, let's talk about it. And before getting too far into the video, I should mention that this is the 12th in a series of videos where I'm playing every Metal Gear game for the first time and reviewing them as I go along in preparation for Metal Gear Delta. And while you don't have to have seen the rest of the videos in order to enjoy this one, you will be missing a lot of important context about my journey with the series if you haven't seen them. So I'll have the full playlist linked in the description below for those of you that want to go check those out first. But with that out of the way, Metal Gear Solid Mobile is an action-adventure stealth game developed by IdeaWorks Game Studio and published by Konami for mobile phones in 2008. And as we have to do with any game in the series not directed by Hideo Kojima, let's talk about whether or not it's canon. Much like my previous video on Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops, this is a weird one to answer, but for very different reasons from that title. Metal Gear Solid Mobile sits in what I like to refer to as the maybe canon. By this, I mean that it's very possible the game could be canon to the mainline series, as it doesn't contradict with anything that comes before or after, but we also don't know if it actually ever happened, as no other Metal Gear titles ever make reference to the events of this game. Starting up the game though, we open with Snake—
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
Sorry, that just, Jesus. Starting up the game, we open with Snake infiltrating a top-secret facility to check out a potential lead that the philanthropy group received from an anonymous tip. The game takes place between MGS 1 and 2, with Snake and Otacon working together as partners to clean up the mess that has come from Ocelot selling the Metal Gear Rex plans and data to whatever countries were willing to pay. So we go off to establish contact with whoever inside the facility reached out to us, giving us our first stretch of gameplay. Overall, it's a weird in-between of MGS 1 and 2, with the game feeling a little more similar to MGS 1. And if you've played those games, then you already know how this goes. You move through the facility, sneaking by guards, collecting new items and gear as you go, trying to find keycard upgrades along the way, and using your new items and gear to access new areas that will progress the story. They've even brought over things like peeking around corners to keep an eye on guards, and the first-person aiming mechanic, which now features these incredibly charming 2D sprites of the weapons you're holding to help save on the resources while running on mobile phones. Overall, I'm incredibly impressed by how well the team managed to port the classic Metal Gear Solid gameplay onto mobile phones of the time, and even though I know not a lot of people played this one, I'm sure a lot of you would feel the same way if you ever got your hands on it. And while I briefly commented on Snake's model earlier, I think now would be a good time to talk more about the overall presentation here. If you were judging this game by the general standard of 2008, it looks pretty bad, but when you consider that this is a mobile game from 2008, it actually makes this game relatively impressive. These environments are fully 3D, no smoke and mirrors about it, and the models and texture work are honestly pretty good considering how little horsepower the devices this game ran on actually had. The game's not going to blow you away visually, but it's obvious that they were pushing mobile phones of the time to their absolute limits, so you have to give them credit for getting it to look as good as it does. Moving forward though, we find a computer node, with Otacon telling us that he could increase the clearance level on our keycard if we hacked into it, leading us into one of the most awkward parts of the gameplay, that being this little hacking minigame. Players need to tune the frequency to keep it in line with these blue notches, which seems easy enough, but it's incredibly momentum based, with it taking about a full second to change direction, and once that direction does change, odds are pretty good that you're going to overshoot the path due to the momentum that you've built up in that time. This minigame pops up a handful of times throughout the game, and while it's a little frustrating, it only takes like 30 seconds to a minute each time it appears, so it's not like it's a huge deal at the end of the day. We finally managed to hack into the system, and oh my god! I'm sorry, this woman's face just gave me a flashback to Mr. Meaty, and if you ever watched that when you were younger, you know. Anyway, the woman introduces herself as Dr. Reed, revealing that she was the one who gave us the tip on this facility. Snake spends a little time flirting with her because, well, it's Solid Snake. I can't imagine you've gotten this far in the series without realizing that he literally cannot resist the temptation to flirt with every woman he comes into contact with.
You've got a great butt.
She tells us that when she started working here, she thought her work would be going towards bettering the world, but instead, it's been used to create weapons of mass destruction, which is why she reached out to us. Snake asks her what kind of weapons the new Metal Gear has been equipped with, but she says that she doesn't know and tells us to meet her in the security control room on the floor below. We start making our way down there before we get a call from a mysterious voice that says we'll talk more soon before abruptly hanging up. We ask Otacon who just called us, and he says that he's not seeing any record of recent codec communications, so we just continue on. While making our way there, I ran into a couple small complications with the stealth, revealing to me that the radio system from MGS2 makes a return here. Sort of. If a guard is knocked out, there's a chance that they'll get called for a random check-in, and when they don't respond, other guards will be sent in to see what's going on. Along with that, you've got the various alert phases pulled over from MGS 2 and 3 as well, but the phases are significantly shorter than they are in those games, which was probably done just to keep up the pace of the game, as this was a mobile game, meaning people would be looking to play for a few minutes at a time, not for an hour or more at a time. Another returning system that really surprised me was the camouflage system from MGS 3 being present. Kind of. Okay, so it's not very similar to MGS 3. But there is a very light camo system in the game. Snake's sneaking suit can change colors to whatever you want it to, with players being able to select the color manually by either taking a picture using the in-game camera, or using their phone's camera to grab any color from the environment around them while playing. The weird thing is though, the camo system only ever factors into your detection when you're sliding along walls or pieces of cover, so it's a feature that only really matters in that very rare circumstance that you're trying to slide under a camera and sneak past a guard at the same time. Still, the ability to change the color of Snake's suit using your phone's actual camera is really cool, so even though it wasn't a mechanic that got used all that much, it was definitely something I had to bring up. Anyway, we continue moving forward, and Otacon calls to tell us that he doesn't trust Dr. Reed, saying that the Damsel in Distress Act feels a little too convenient to him. Snake tells him that they have more important things to worry about right now, and we continue to move forward through the facility. And as surprisingly good as the stealth is in MGS Mobile, in the event that you are spotted, the combat is pretty terrible. It's the sort of thing you'd expect from a game like this, with the team making a valiant effort to make the combat feel good here, but with them just being too limited by the control scheme of mobile phones at the time. Due to the way the game controls, making minor adjustments and split-second decisions doesn't really feel all that great, and anytime that I did get into combat, it just kind of felt like I took way more damage from enemies than I normally would in a Metal Gear game, which was purely due to the fact that I couldn't take the enemies down quickly enough. Combat in the Metal Gear games is always a bit of a risky option, but the risk here is much higher than it is in any other 3D game in the franchise, meaning that I just avoided it at all costs. Otacon eventually calls us back, saying that he did some digging, and he wasn't able to find a single mention of Dr. Reed in the records of any scientific foundations. Snake reminds him that this is a Black Ops facility, so her name isn't exactly going to be plastered all around for the public to see, but Otacon insists that he should have found at least something to acknowledge her existence, saying that he'll continue to look into it. Back to the gameplay though, I haven't brought it up yet, but the guard AI here is really poor. I don't think that this is because the team at IdeaWorks was incapable of making a good AI for them though. Rather, they seem to have been dialed back intentionally to account for the clunkier controls, much like what happened in Portable Ops. They have the typical AI issues that pop up in the Metal Gear games, like crazy tunnel vision and a general lack of awareness, but the camo system in this game makes things even funnier than usual. I mentioned earlier that if the color of your sneaking suit generally matches the color of a wall, you'll get a camouflage bonus in this game, making it so that you can blend in and become harder to detect. But what I didn't mention is that if you match the wall's color exactly, you're completely invisible to the guards. This is especially funny because Snake's sneaking suit doesn't cover his head at all, so it almost makes it look like the guards are just walking past this floating head in the hallway as if it's nothing out of the ordinary. As we're nearing the security control room, Dr. Reed calls asking if we're close, worried that the guards might find her before we get there. Snake reassures her that he'll be there soon, and she tells him to call her Victoria from now on, giving Otacon another clue to dig into. Just then, she tells us that security in the area is increasing and that she'll need to relocate, but she tells us not to worry, as we should be able to access the security systems just fine without her. Once we get there, we go to access the security systems before the alarms all go off and the area gets put on lockdown. Otacon tries to get us out by hacking into the system, and while we're waiting, Dr. Reed calls us again, revealing that she doesn't work at the facility and that she's not even real. She explains that she's a VR construct designed to seduce and manipulate male operatives, which she somehow does with that face, before introducing us to her commander. The commander explains that they lured us here using Dr. Reed and convinced us to shut down the security systems, allowing them to walk right in the front door with their men and steal Metal Gear. We trick one of the patrolling soldiers into thinking we escaped the room, allowing us to slip out so that we can find a way to stop them from stealing Metal Gear. On the way there, we get another call from the mysterious voice, saying that we need to look to our past in order to progress forward, before getting another call from them a couple minutes later, saying that they've made some progress on something that will help us see through the fog of deception that surrounds us. As we continue forward, Otacon tells us that someone is trying to hack into our codec frequency, glitching out a bit temporarily before telling us that everything is fine. We eventually reach an observation room, hacking into the computers in there, and Otacon pulls up footage from some security cameras of a Metal Gear Rex being stored on the floor below us, so we move down there to prevent the terrorists from getting their hands on it. On our way down, the mysterious voice calls us again, telling us to be careful as they don't believe anyone has ever made it this far. Snake asks who they are again, with Otacon asking us if we're talking to ourselves before reminding us that we need to keep moving to prevent the terrorists from unleashing Metal Gear. And as we keep moving, things around us start to glitch out as well, and when we call Otacon, he says that the mission parameters have been exceeded and that we're entering untested simulation areas.
Right.
Just after this, we reach the first and only mandatory combat section of the game, which only further highlights just how poor the shooting is. I have nothing to add here that I didn't mention earlier, other than the fact that this is the only room I died in during my entire playthrough, and I died twice in here, just highlighting how bad the combat actually is. The mysterious voice calls us again, telling us that we were captured, drugged, and placed into a simulation to be monitored, revealing that the entire game up to this point has been taking place in a VR mission without our knowledge. The caller then reveals himself to be the real Otacon, proving that it's him by admitting that he peed his pants in front of Snake when they first met. Otacon warns us that if we die in the simulation, our heart will stop in real life, because the "if you die in game, you die in real life" trope hasn't been done enough, telling us that we have to complete the simulation in order to escape from it. We enter the Metal Gear hangar, getting into a boss fight against the leader of the terrorists, whose name is Boss. Boss wields a chain gun, shooting at us from a higher elevation, forcing us to take cover and wait for the gun to jam, before either popping out to return fire or hitting him with a Nikita missile. Chaff grenades can also interfere with the electronic components of his chain gun, causing it to jam more quickly. Because that makes sense. While we're fighting him, the room progressively glitches out more and more, and once we defeat Boss, the simulation abruptly ends, causing us to wake up on a table. We hear two voices talking about how useful our performance data will be, with one of them telling the other to wipe our memory of these events and set us free. One of them then says that they should see if Jack could do any better before the screen fades to black and the credits roll. All up, the story is fine. It gets the job done in getting you from place to place, it does throw some mystery at the player that they'll get answers to as the game goes on, and it doesn't directly conflict with any existing Metal Gear titles. It's by no means a great Metal Gear story, but for a mobile game, it's serviceable, and like I said at the beginning of the video, it could have taken place in the mainline Metal Gear timeline. Overall, Metal Gear Solid Mobile is a surprisingly competent experience. I definitely have a tendency to write off mobile games almost immediately due to the fact that they almost always fail to offer an experience on par with home consoles or PC games, but I would say that this game is better than Snake's Revenge, so that has to count for something. The story isn't particularly great, but the gameplay is basically just MGS1 with a couple of MGS2's mechanics and systems added in, meaning that if you liked those games, it's hard to dislike this one. Its pacing is surprisingly strong, and the entire game took me just shy of 2 hours to complete, meaning it doesn't outstay its welcome by any means. I really am impressed by how well the team at IdeaWorks managed to make this feel like a proper Metal Gear title, so at the end of the day, I'm going to give Metal Gear Solid Mobile a 7 out of 10. What's up guys, thanks for sticking around. If you want to dive deeper into my Metal Gear series, click on the playlist here. And if you want to support more videos like this one, check out my Patreon page where you can get things like behind the scenes updates, early video access, and more. Anyway, I'm going to get back to work, and I hope to see all of you guys right here for the next Metal Gear review.